Good morning. Welcome to NTD.
Good morning. Here are today's top stories. Japan's Prime Minister is in Washington on his first official visit to the White House. An official arrival ceremony is set for the South Lawn today.
Central Command says the U.S. has transferred thousands of seized Iranian weapons to Ukraine. How is the U.S. supporting Ukraine in the absence of a big funding bill?
The Arizona Supreme Court upholds a 160-year-old law barring all abortions except to save a woman's life. More on the law and reactions from top officials.
Speaker Mike Johnson has decided to delay sending impeachment articles against Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas. Luis Martinez reporting from Capitol Hill as Congress reconvenes.
President Biden says his administration is now trying to figure out whether he can shut down the border, should it be deemed necessary. More on the president's interview.
Former President Trump loses another bid to have his so-called hush money trial delayed. What are the judge and prosecution saying?
The Senate summons Boeing CEO to testify as a whistleblower comes forward with new safety allegations against Boeing.
This is NTD Good Morning. Live from our global headquarters, here are Evelyn Lee and Kevin Hogan.
Welcome to NTD.
Welcome. Today is Wednesday, April 10th. And on that meeting today, Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida says that one thing that he is not willing to discuss is the buyout from Nippon Steel of U.S. Steel.
Oh yeah, a lot of controversy over that. And another thing that's causing some friction between the two countries is that impasse over Ukraine aid that's frustrating some U.S. allies, and how the U.S. views Japan's cybersecurity as a weak link in their security group.
Right, a lot going on today, and this is topping our story. President Biden and First Lady Jill Biden welcomed Japanese Prime Minister Kishida and his wife to the White House last night.
Formalities kick off this morning with an official arrival ceremony on the South Lawn.
The ceremony will include a military review, both countries' national anthems, and remarks from both heads of state.
The leaders will then head to the Oval Office for bilateral meetings. A joint news conference will follow this afternoon.
Officials say today's summit will be a historic upgrade in defense ties with Japan in the face of growing Chinese regime pressure.
Talks are expected to include plans to upgrade U.S. military command structure in Japan. The U.S. ambassador to Japan says it will allow for better coordination and increased deterrence in the Pacific. Japan's prime minister has been invited to address a joint meeting of Congress tomorrow.
Now let's bring in retired Colonel Grant Newsham for some analysis on this. He's a senior fellow at the Center for Security Policy and the author of When China Attacks. Good morning, Grant. Thank you for being us this early. Now, first, a lot of goals set for today, and it's been highly anticipated. What do you expect to come out of this?
Oh, I expect there's going to be a very nice press conference afterwards, and there's going to be a number of agreements that they've reached. But in terms of any practical improvements in the ability of U.S. and Japanese forces to operate together in both peacetime and wartime if necessary, that remains to be seen. I'll be a little bit surprised if they do actually come up with something that has some concrete benefits to how U.S. and Japanese forces can operate. What I've heard talked about so far isn't that.
Sorry, can you repeat again? Why do you think that there wouldn't be? Why do you find it hard to believe that there might be anything concrete coming out of this?
Well, in terms of, as I said, U.S. and Japanese forces being able to operate together, what that requires really is for them to sit down in a room and come up with operational planning and then go out and train and exercise. And they've never really done that. Hard to believe. You would need something like a permanent joint headquarters in Japan, where U.S. and Japanese forces get together and conduct the defense activities to defend the country and the surrounding area. They still don't have that. So you'd need to see, say, something concrete, say a headquarters where the two forces get together with the mission to be able to conduct joint operations together to fight a war. We just haven't seen that yet. What's being talked about is maybe sending a four-star general to command the U.S. forces in Japan, instead of a 3-star general who's currently there, maybe letting him arrange some exercises and pass information along. But ultimately, combat command remains at U.S. Indo-PACOM in Hawaii. So the headquarters of U.S. Forces Japan really doesn't have a major role. So that's what I'm looking for, is to see if there's a real sort of operational improvement. And you do have to have something tangible like a joint headquarters and the mission of fighting together. And we just don't have that yet. There's a lot of goodwill, but that's about it so far.
Yes, that's a very good point. Now, there are more American soldiers based in Japan than any other foreign country, so it does seem like the U.S. is incredibly important when it comes to Japan's security. Can you also tell me a bit more about the other way around, the importance of Japan to the U.S. national security interests?
Oh, Japan's immensely important. I don't think we could maintain our position in Asia without really a capable Japan self-defense force and solidly linked U.S. and Japanese forces with the political ties that go with that. That is how important Japan is now. For a long time, it was just thought America can take care of everything. Japan can go sit in the corner. Those days are long gone and have been for at least a decade, if not longer. But Japan is essential. I say without them, America would be in a lot of trouble in the Asia Pacific. But of course, without us, Japan would be in even bigger trouble. So it's really an alliance of convenience, but also we're two democratic nations and free countries, and we are just about at war. So it's important that countries like us and Japan do get along well, and we have for 60 plus years. We just need to make the relationship sort of more practical in some terms, and I'm particularly talking about military.
Right, and since we just have a few seconds left, one last question before we go. So, because hearing about this interdependence and how important Japan and U.S. are to each other, some also now say that Japan is trying to future-proof the relationship in case of a Trump presidency. But with that dependency, what's your take on this? Are Japan's worries for their security relationship with the U.S. really warranted in that case?
No. Japan has always worried, no matter who's in the White House. I think their fears of a Trump presidency are well overblown, but they were terrified when Obama took over, when Mr. Bush took over. They always do that, so this is nothing new. They ought to have a little more faith in the United States. We promised to die on their behalf, and I think we will do it if necessary. They haven't actually made a similar promise to us, but I do wish they would show a little more confidence in us.
Understood. Thank you so much, Grant Newsham, for your great insights, as always.
Thank you.
President Biden criticized Israel for its handling of the war in Gaza in an interview that aired yesterday.
Biden, calling for a ceasefire and more aid supplies, said he thinks what Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu is doing is a mistake. The president says he doesn't agree with Netanyahu's approach.
Yesterday, Senate leader Chuck Schumer met with Israeli opposition leader Yair Lapid in Washington. That's after Schumer criticized Netanyahu in a floor speech last month and called for new elections in Israel. NTD's Jeremy Sandberg has more updates on the Israel-Hamas war.
President Biden, in an interview with Univision that aired Tuesday, called Israel's prime minister's actions a mistake. The president says he thinks it's outrageous that drone strikes killed 7 aid workers in Gaza last week.
So what I'm calling for is for the Israelis to just call for a ceasefire, allow for the next 6-8 weeks total access to all food and medicine going into the country.
The Hamas-run Gaza Health Ministry says over 33,000 people have been killed in 6 months of war. The ministry does not differentiate between combatants and civilians. Meanwhile, Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu vowed to complete the elimination of the terrorist group Hamas,
including in Rafah. No force in the world will stop us.
the White House said Tuesday. An in-person meeting of Israeli and U.S. officials on a planned operation in Rafah will take place in a couple of weeks.
But again, those open line of communication, there's constant communications happening every day.
National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan said although there's been an increase of aid into Gaza over the last couple days, it's not good enough.
We would like to see more action following through on what the Prime Minister has announced publicly, and we'd like to see that over the course of the next few days.
Senate leader Chuck Schumer met with Israeli opposition leader Yair Lapid in Washington after Lapid met with Secretary of State Antony Blinken on Monday. Lapid said a hostage ceasefire deal would be difficult but doable. Blinken says Israel has not informed the U.S. of any specific date for an offensive push into Rafah. He says the administration is convinced that major military operations in the city would be extremely dangerous for civilians caught in harm's way. Jeremy Sandberg, NTD News.
U.S. Central Command says the U.S. transferred thousands of Iranian weapons it seized to Ukraine.
The transfer comes as further funding for Ukraine remains stalled in the House.
Central Command said the material transferred was enough to arm about 4,000 soldiers. They said the Iranian-made weapons were gathered from stateless vessels over the last 4 years.
Central Command said initial reports suggest some of the weapons were bound for Iran-backed Houthi terrorists in Yemen.
In the absence of a large funding package, the Biden administration also announced an emergency $130 million military sale to Ukraine. It includes equipment to maintain and upgrade its Hawk air defense systems. Coming up, Senate Republicans ask Speaker Mike Johnson to delay sending impeachment articles against Secretary of Homeland Security Alejandro Mayorkas. Luis Martinez reports from Capitol Hill as Congress reconvenes.
A 160-year-old law barring all abortions except to save a woman's life is upheld by the Arizona Supreme Court. More on the law and the reactions of top officials.
Former President Trump lost another bid to have his so-called hush money trial delayed. We look at what the judge and prosecutor are saying and where the case is heading. Good to have you back. Speaker Mike Johnson will delay sending House impeachment articles against Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas to the Senate this week.
This decision comes after Republican senators requested additional time on Tuesday to build support for holding a comprehensive trial. Our Washington correspondent Luis Martinez has more from Capitol Hill.
Senate Republicans held a press conference on Tuesday where they stressed the importance of holding an impeachment trial against Secretary of Homeland Security Alejandro Mayorkas. Remember that Secretary Mayorkas was impeached almost 2 months ago by the House of Representatives. 2 charges were brought up: breach of public trust and the willful and systematic refusal to uphold the law. Senate Republicans have also asked Speaker Johnson to delay the delivery of articles of impeachment to the Senate floor that was expected to happen this Wednesday until next Monday. Let's listen to what Senator Roger Marshall had to say about the impeachment proceedings.
Several of us have pointed out that Senator Schumer is unleashing another nuclear weapon here. But can you imagine what the retaliation might be? Could you imagine a day and time where we have a Republican president, a Democrat-controlled House? They impeach the Republican president. They send it to a Republican-controlled Senate. And that Senate said, we're going to table it. I just think that Americans and the national media would lose their minds over it. But we're letting Chuck Schumer get by with it for whatever reason now.
Senate Republicans also stressed that if Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer moved to dismiss the trial, they would retaliate with a nuclear option, or in other words, they would hold up any proceedings in the Senate floor until any future notice to hold Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer to account for dismissing a trial, which is, of course, the responsibility, the constitutional responsibility of the Senate. On the House of Representatives, Speaker Johnson had signaled that once Congress reconvened, and that happened this Tuesday, he would bring Ukraine aid to a vote. This Tuesday, Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene, the Republican from Georgia, sent a letter to all of her Republican colleagues urging them to support her in her motion to vacate the speakership, her motion to vacate Speaker Johnson. Let's listen to what Congressman Krishnamurthy, the Democrat from Illinois, had to say about this.
Look, if Speaker Johnson brings Ukraine aid to the floor and other aid packages to the floor and does the right thing, and then Marjorie Taylor Greene seeks to remove him or moves to remove him, I think that Democrats would join in a motion to kill such a maneuver.
So as we can see, very interesting. House Democrats vowing, or at least considering, supporting Speaker Mike Johnson in order to get Ukraine aid to vote on the House floor. Back to you.
The Arizona Supreme Court ruled yesterday the state must adhere to a 160-year-old abortion law. It bars all abortions except in cases when it is necessary to save a pregnant woman's life. NTD's Daniel Monahan has more on the ruling and the reactions of lawmakers.
I'm devastated by this decision.
The ruling will make a Civil War-era abortion law enforceable in the state. The law can be traced to as early as 1864, before Arizona became a state, and was codified in 1901. It carries a prison sentence of 2 to 5 years for abortion providers, and it puts Arizona among states with the strictest abortion laws in the country. The state Supreme Court has delayed enforcement of the law for 14 days to give the plaintiffs an opportunity to pursue other challenges in a lower court. Arizona Governor Katie Hobbs called it a dark day in Arizona.
It is really unconscionable that folks in Arizona now are going to have to go to Nevada, California, New Mexico, or Colorado to get the care that they need.
White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre says the law fails to protect women even when their health is at risk.
With today's decision, millions of Arizonians will soon face an even more extreme and dangerous abortion ban than they did before.
President Biden issued a statement saying, "The ruling is a result of the extreme agenda of Republican elected officials who are committed to ripping away women's freedom." Former President Trump wrote on Truth Social today that it's Democrats who are extreme. He said they would allow abortions in the 7th, 8th, or 9th month, or allow the execution of a baby after birth, as Trump said was suggested by the former Democrat governor of Virginia. In a Monday video statement prior to the Arizona ruling, former President Trump said he is strongly in favor of exceptions for rape, incest, and the life of the mother. The Arizona abortion ban does not include exceptions for rape or incest. Conservative commentator Charlie Kirk wrote on X that getting rid of abortion is an irrefutable, necessary, moral good for society and Arizona. He said, "Praise God we get to be in the fight for the unborn during such a time as this." The 4-2 ruling stems from a case that was revived after the U.S. Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade. The court majority opinion in Arizona said, "Physicians are now on notice that all abortions, except those necessary to save a woman's life, are illegal." The case is the latest high-profile example of the battle over abortion access that has played out across several states since Roe v. Wade was overturned. Since that decision, nearly 24 states have banned or limited access to the procedure. Arizona voters will soon have a say on the matter. There will be a November ballot measure that would ask voters to enshrine abortion access in the state's constitution. Daniel Monahan, NTD News.
Former President Trump loses another bid to have his New York trial delayed. NTD's Jeremy Sandberg has more on that story and updates on other charges Trump is facing.
Former President Trump lost another bid on Tuesday to delay his criminal trial from starting next week. The case involves so-called hush money payments made to adult film actress Stormy Daniels. Trump's lawyers argued Trump should be given time to challenge a gag order in the case. Judge Merchan imposed the order barring the former president from publicly discussing witnesses, prosecutors, court staff, and their families. An appeals court judge swiftly denied the request, but a full panel of appeals judges will later consider Trump's underlying challenge of the gag order. This came a day after Trump's lawyers made a separate motion to delay the trial while seeking to move the case out of Manhattan. That request was denied as well, though the motion to ultimately move the trial will continue. A Trump spokesperson called the trial a witch hunt and said the legal team would continue to fight against it. A lawyer for Trump said the gag order would lead to irreparable First Amendment damages. He argued that Trump should be free to critique the case and the people involved in it, and said the public has the right to hear from him. A lawyer with the Manhattan DA's office said the trial should not be delayed, since Trump could have made the appeal earlier. He also said the gag order was in the public's best interest and necessary for the integrity of the case. He also said his office had to increase security due to Trump's statements, and that potential witnesses were reluctant to testify because of Trump's comments. In Trump's classified documents case, a judge on Tuesday allowed prosecutors to shield the identities of possible witnesses in the case for now. Prosecutors argued revealing the names of witnesses would open them up to threats and harassment. The judge initially agreed to make the information public, but has since re-evaluated her decision. Her new order will allow more records in the case to be made public, but witnesses will be referred to by fictitious names. Trump has pleaded not guilty to charges of illegally keeping highly sensitive records after he left office in 2021 and obstruction. A trial date in the case has not been set. Jeremy Sandberg, NTD News.
Let's break down the appeals court ruling denying Trump's request to delay his criminal trial in New York with Paul Kamenar, the lead counsel at the National Legal and Policy Center. Great to have you with us, Paul. Thanks for joining us. Why did the judge deny Trump's request to delay the trial without even referring it to a panel?
Well, there are two requests to delay the trial, one for the change of venue and one about the gag order. And the one with the gag order, the judge said, hey, look, you can appeal that to the higher court by Monday when the trial starts. So that's not really going to help out much. The other one was the change of venue, and that the judge said, well, it's too late, and really didn't have time to go to the full court. But they did say, hey, look, once you start picking a jury, if it looks like you can't get a fair jury in Manhattan, then you can renew your motion to transfer it to, say, Long Island or somewhere else. So it's not over yet, but unfortunately, these are two setbacks.
Yeah, and those filings are due Monday, and that's, like you said, that's when jury selection is going to start here. I want to point to one of Bragg's lawyers, Stephen Wu, how he said that the defense is saying that this is high-minded, this challenge to the gag order, but he says that they're talking about inflammatory and denigrating remarks about the witnesses and so forth. What's your reaction to this stance that he has?
Well, of course, he's spinning it his way. I mean, what's going on here is that the judge's daughter is working for a Democratic fundraising group that is making money off this trial, and the New York rules on disqualification is clear that if a judge has a relative that's in with 6 degrees of relationship to the judge that could make money, that he should recuse. So he's just complaining about the judge's daughter being a political hack in this case and going after him. So I think his First Amendment rights are clear that he should be able to talk about that.
Okay, Paul, and can you please explain a little bit further all the reasons why Trump's team is trying to delay this trial and if they have any merit to them?
Well, of course, they would like to delay the trial till after the election because this is clearly election interference. Alvin Bragg, keep in mind, ran for office saying he's going to get Trump, and here's a case that really doesn't have any merit. They're taking these so-called hush money payments, which is a legal non-disclosure agreement, and trying to dress it up saying that's a campaign violation for his election. But the Federal Election Commission and the Justice Department, which has jurisdiction over campaign violations, took a pass on this. So, you know, this is really ridiculous that they're trying to bootstrap this minor New York law on business records, et cetera, into a full-blown federal case. And I think it's not going to work. And if it does work, I'm sure he'll win on appeal.
Right. Federal officials do not even want to touch this here. Jury selection is now set to begin next week. How are they going to get a fair trial for Trump in that jurisdiction?
Well, it's going to be very difficult. I don't see how. I mean, they just came out with the juror questionnaires that the judge authorized. And those questions basically saying, are you involved with QAnon and things like that? But they don't ask the basic question. Hey, did you vote for Joe Biden? Did you give Joe Biden campaign contributions? You know, I would say 90% of the jurors did vote for Biden. So this is a case of, do they want their candidate to win and do they want Donald Trump to lose? I would say, if I were in charge, I would say nobody can be on the jury who voted for either Biden or Trump. Get somebody that is just apolitical and judge a case on the merits.
What's a very great update from you, Paul Kamenar, lead counsel at the National Legal and Policy Center. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much. My pleasure.
President Biden discussed the southern border in an interview yesterday. He said his administration is trying to determine whether he has the authority to shut down the border should it be deemed necessary. In the interview, Biden told Univision he was being encouraged to try to do it alone. This after bipartisan legislation that he says would have granted him authority to shut the border stalled in Congress. Biden says there is no guarantee he has the power without legislation, but the administration is examining the possibility. Illegal immigration is a central issue in this year's presidential campaign. Former President Trump has accused Biden of dropping the ball on border issues as millions of illegal immigrants have entered the country under his watch. Coming up, the director of the FBI said he was extremely concerned about foreign rivals and terrorist groups targeting the U.S.
We take a closer look at what his comments are and where he said the next big threat will likely come from. And the U.S. recruiting brilliant Chinese minds to develop AI. But that comes with the risk of this knowledge falling into the wrong hands. That's been called a conundrum. An analyst explains.
The mother and father of Oxford High School shooter Ethan Crumbley will be spending time in prison. We'll tell you more about their sentencing in this landmark case. Welcome back. The director of the FBI said yesterday that foreign adversaries and terrorist groups are stepping up efforts to target the United States.
Wray told a gathering of the American Bar Association that China is the defining threat of our generation.
FBI Director Christopher Wray warned that America's enemies were using covert tactics to target cyber operations and security in a manner he described as mafia-like. In the wake of Hamas's attack on Israel on October 7th, Wray said foreign terrorists, including ISIS and al-Qaeda, have renewed calls for attacks against Jewish communities in the U.S. and across the West. Wray said the FBI is working to prevent a coordinated attack from terrorist groups. He also said that Russia presented a real threat by targeting underwater cables that facilitate global communications. Since the invasion of Ukraine, he said Russia has conducted reconnaissance on the U.S. energy sector. But the biggest threat, according to Wray, comes from China. He said the ruling Chinese Communist Party is, quote, throwing the whole government at undermining the security and economy of the rule of law world. According to Wray, China's cyber program is larger than that of every other major nation, outnumbering the U.S. by 50 to 1. Wray said the CCP often uses espionage, foreign influence, and election interference in tandem, and that American businesses are a prime target. Wray denounced efforts to cut the FBI budget, saying, quote, China ain't cutting their budget. Last month, House Republicans supported cutting hundreds of millions of dollars from the FBI budget. Wray said cutting the budget would help criminals, child predators, and cartels, and ultimately hurt the American people. He also threw his weight behind Section 702 of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act. The act allows the government to collect data without a warrant from non-Americans overseas who use U.S.-based messaging platforms. The act has come under fire for its improper use against Americans.
The federal judge has sentenced a Florida woman to a month in prison for stealing and selling the diary of President Biden's daughter.
Judge Laura Taylor Swain called the actions of Amy Harris despicable during sentencing yesterday.
Harris pleaded guilty to a conspiracy charge in 2022 and admitted taking the diary and other belongings from a friend's home in Florida. She then tried to sell it before the 2020 election.
The prison sentence is followed by 3 years of supervised release. That includes 3 months of home detention and participation in an outpatient substance abuse program. The judge also ordered Harris to forfeit $20,000 paid to her by Project Veritas.
Prosecutors initially recommended the federal court not to impose a prison term on Harris, but they adjusted their sentencing request after she repeatedly failed to show up for sentencing dates.
Harris says the no-shows are because she had to take care of her 2 children, ages 6 and 8. The judge ordered Harris to report to prison in July when her 2 children go on vacation. Harris apologized in court and said she knows what she did was wrong.
In a landmark case, the parents of Michigan high school shooter Ethan Crumbley were sentenced to prison yesterday. James and Jennifer Crumbley will both spend 10 to 15 years behind bars.
Jennifer and James Crumbley are the first parents convicted over a school shooting by a teenager. They were both found guilty of involuntary manslaughter.
I believe that the following sentences would be in the best interest of justice and are reasonable and proportionate to the seriousness of the matter and the circumstances surrounding each defendant.
The judge explained that these convictions are not about poor parenting. These convictions confirm repeated actions or lack of acts that could have halted an oncoming runaway train. Ethan was 15 years old when he shot and killed 4 people at his high school on November 30th, 2021. The mother of one of the victims spoke at the sentencing.
As a parent, we all make mistakes. This is a normal way of life. Usually when mistakes happen, we learn from them. We try to fix it or talk it over. But continuing to make the same mistake over and over again is no longer a mistake, it's a choice. That becomes a decision. Those decisions that you made ultimately took my daughter's life.
Prosecutors said the parents were criminally negligent for providing a gun to their child and for ignoring warning signs of his mental health issues. The parents' defense teams argued it was impossible for the parents to envision their son committing a shooting. Jennifer and James Crumbly both addressed the court.
I sit here today to express my deepest sorrow for the families of Hannah, Tate, Madison, Justin, and to all those affected on November 30th, 2021. The driving weight this has taken on my heart and soul cannot be expressed into words.
The Crumbleys will be eligible for parole after serving 10 years, and they will get credit for the nearly 2.5 years already spent in jail. Reporting by Allison Lee, NTD News.
The Justice Department filed a lawsuit yesterday against West Memphis School District for denying an employee's request for remote work.
They say the refusal violated the Americans with Disabilities Act.
The lawsuit accuses the school district of denying the request of a school science curriculum specialist with a disability for temporary telework, this to avoid damage to her health.
The district denied the request without discussing possible alternatives. The employee was forced to resign as a result.
Assistant Attorney General Kristen Clark emphasized the importance of telework for people with disabilities and employers' obligation to accommodate them.
The case stems from a referral by the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. The state of Missouri executed convicted murderer Brian Dorsey yesterday. This despite apparent appeals from dozens of correctional officers. Brian Dorsey was sentenced to death for the 2006 murders of his cousin and her husband. He was executed by lethal injection. His lawyers argued for his sentence to be commuted, saying he had been fully rehabilitated in prison. They also said the public defenders assigned to him failed to represent him properly during the trial. Dorsey also found support from current and former prison staff. His lawyers said more than 70 correctional officers backed a commutation of his death sentence to life in prison. The judge ultimately was not convinced that this warranted changing Dorsey's sentence. A cousin of both Dorsey and the victim said Dorsey's execution was absolutely unnecessary. In other news, the U.S. wants to be a leader in artificial intelligence, outpacing China. But to do that, it needs to tap into the talent pool of Chinese nationals. Sounds like a catch-22. Could investing in those Chinese minds lead to the technology falling into the hands of the Chinese regime? Here's a response from Anders Kaur, the publisher of the Journal of Political Risk.
The New York Times recently called that a, quote, conundrum, unquote, and it certainly is. We want to bring brilliant Chinese AI scientists to the United States. Ideally, we want them to move here with their families, their finances, and become, fully American citizens and work, for the promotion of democracy, use their talents for the promotion of democracy. Unfortunately, some of them, when they come over and they work, Chinese nationals will then go back to China. And you've got whole groups of them going back from places like the Los Alamos labs that call themselves, Los Alamos alumni. This is a national lab that does everything from nuclear weapons to AI to everything else. But yeah, that is certainly the concern.
Yeah, and we just look back to recently a former Google software engineer was charged with allegedly trying to send the information about AI back to a company based in Beijing, in which case the CCP would likely have a chance to get its hands on that. Who is leading the AI race, the U.S. and China, and why, and where's that all heading?
That researcher, I mean, we need to realize that researcher is the rare occasion, right? There are not that many who steal and then go straight back to China. But the concern is there. On certain levels, a new study has found that China is producing more AI researchers based on their location of undergraduate education. Quite a bit more, like 2 or 3 times more than the United States is. That's a concern, especially for the future, because if they're producing most of the top level researchers, and this is measured by how many publications and presentations at the top conferences, then they're going to be leading in the future if we're not careful. We lead on some levels. For example, the supercomputing chips that AI needs. These have been now banned for export to China, but China is still getting some of them somehow, and there's evidence that they have some of our top chips anyway. But you need a lot of them to run AI.
Right, and Anders, when we conceive of the ways that the Chinese Communist Party could use AI to its advantage, we could just look back to September when it was reported that these Chinese operatives were using these AI systems to create these deep fakes to get an image that looks like an American voter, and then just to kind of disrupt the public discourse and spread misinformation there. What is the CCP planning to do with AI, and how is it leveraging this technology to displace the United States as a world power?
You mentioned one of them. I mean, the ability to influence our elections with AI that automatically updates. I mean, you can just imagine ChatGPT that's used to individually target voters with all of their personal prejudices and personal issues and what's important to them when they go to the polls. But there are also military applications, for example, drones that update their strategies and targeting in flight when they're away from communications with the headquarters back in Beijing. So, everything is at risk now with AI. AI is, potentially taking over jobs, American jobs. So the more China can develop AI, the more in danger our economy, our politics, our military is.
Anders Corr, publisher of the Journal of Political Risk.
Thank you.
Coming up, a new low for small business sentiment in the U.S. A survey reveals that last month, small business confidence slipped to its lowest in more than 11 years.
And the Senate summons Boeing CEO David Calhoun to testify as a whistleblower comes forward with new safety allegations against the aircraft manufacturer. Stay tuned for more after the break. Thanks for staying with us. We have NTD's Business Matters host Don Ma now with us to give us the latest updates from the financial world.
Don, let's talk geopolitics.
Okay, let me start off with this first. So the U.S. is reportedly trying to reduce its reliance for critical minerals on China. So what the U.S. is doing is reportedly turning to African countries to reduce its reliance. Okay, so in a report, the United States Institute of Peace said economic and national security were dependent on securing a reliable supply of critical minerals. Now, these resources are key to a number of sectors, and that's including electric vehicle manufacturing, of course, and as well as defense industry. So very important here. And the group said the U.S. is almost 100% reliant on, quote, foreign countries of concern, and that's mainly on China for these minerals. So the concern here is that the U.S. could become vulnerable to China's export curbs, and we've seen China do that in the past on different things. Western mining companies are already falling behind Chinese rivals in Africa who are broadening their investment throughout the country. So very important here.
Yeah, absolutely important to bring that to our attention, because since China has become the producer of almost 3/4 of the key industrial minerals, the lead producer, that is. So I like to talk about airlines. Again, Boeing just can't really shake the limelight recently, so tell us more about Boeing.
Yeah, exactly. A lot of news on Boeing these past few weeks. So the latest one here is that the Federal Aviation Administration is investigating a Boeing whistleblower's claims that the company dismissed safety and quality concerns, and those concerns are regarding the production of the plane makers 787 and 777 jets. So this is according to an agency spokesperson. And a Boeing engineer apparently said that he identified engineering problems that affected the structural integrity of the jets, and claimed that Boeing even took shortcuts in the 787 assembly process, though NTD was not able to independently verify these claims. But this has brought interest from a Senate subcommittee, which has since summoned Boeing CEO David Calhoun to testify about these new whistleblower claims, and the panel will hold a hearing with the whistleblower next week. But Boeing has not said whether the CEO would actually be attending, and Boeing stock fell 2% yesterday.
Well, and the New York Times says that Boeing says no such safety issue exists here. But does this mean anything for Airbus with Boeing's safety record under so much scrutiny?
Well, Airbus did say yesterday, to answer your question, that their jet deliveries rose 12% in the first quarter. Airbus delivered 142 aircraft, putting the French company ahead of U.S. rival Boeing, which delivered 83 commercial airplanes during this same period. And Airbus is saying that it won 170 new orders in the first quarter with no cancellations, and that number doesn't yet include Japan Airlines order, which was actually announced last month.
Right, and with really definitely seems like all the quality issues and especially delays wouldn't come without consequences. But switching gears again, you have an update for us on the Paris Olympics, I heard.
Yeah, something interesting here. Seems like a renewed interest into this sporting event. So as of the July ceremony, as the July opening ceremony for the 2024 Olympics draws closer, U.S. broadcaster NBC Universal seeing renewed interest from major corporate sponsors in the sporting event. And this is as fans are expected to fill Olympic stadiums for the very first time, actually, since the COVID-19 pandemic. So very interesting here. Comcast-owned NBCU said yesterday that it sold $1.2 billion in advertising for the Paris Games and is on track to achieve a new sales record in Olympic history. And the company paid over $7.6 billion to renew its broadcasting rights deal through 2032, and that's the largest deal in the world for these games, actually. And ad spending from International Olympic Committee sponsors is currently up 18% from the previous Summer Olympics in Tokyo that took place in 2021. So new records here.
Yeah, well, in 2020, the NBCU said it sold $1.25 billion in ads surrounding the Tokyo Summer Olympics. Big stuff. How are U.S. small businesses doing, Don?
Yeah, seems like not very good. A bit of disconnect from the data we're getting from the government. So what happened was that U.S. small business confidence slipped to the lowest level in more than 11 years in March last month. And this comes during rising concerns about inflation. And this was according to a report that was released yesterday, and the National Federation of Independent Business said its small business optimism index fell to the lowest since December 2012. It was the 27th straight month in the index that was below the 50-year average, and 25% of owners reported that inflation as their single most important problem in operating their business. So, this reflects higher input and labor costs. The share of businesses raising average selling prices rose as well compared to the prior month. And that actually aligns with a pickup in consumer prices in the first 2 months of the year. And price increases, by the way, were prevalent in the finance, retail, construction, and wholesale transportation sectors. Also an increase as well in the share of businesses raising compensation, even as demand for labor is cooling.
Well, that is very important news, considering that the SBA's Office of Advocacy said there are over 33 million small businesses in the United States.
Exactly.
Don Ma, host of NTD's Business Matters, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Stay with us. The rising cost of living is forcing couples to make tough decisions with food, flowers, and makeup costs for their upcoming weddings. The DIY trend has brides taking on planning and decorations themselves. And if you have nuptials in the near future, we have some money-saving tips after the break.
Good to have you back. The rising cost of living is forcing couples to make some tough decisions with food, flowers, and makeup costs for their upcoming weddings.
One solution is to become a do-it-yourself bride, a recent trend promoting crafty brides to take on much of the decorations and planning themselves.
Planning a wedding can not only be intimidating, but also expensive. Choosing a dress, flowers, venue, and cake are just some details that quickly add up. But with the cost of living crisis, wedding budgets over the next couple of years are facing a financial squeeze. Do-it-yourself weddings are gaining popularity as a way to save money while still looking expensive.
When couples are looking on social media, it is really important for them to be able to see that this may not have cost what it looks like it costs, but there's just been effort put in. So maybe actually now the impact of the cost of living crisis is that couples need to take a lot more effort to get that outcome rather than before they could just pay for it.
With the price of flowers rising, one cost-cutting measure is DIY floral arrangements. Cutting out a florist can potentially save around 75% of the cost of hiring a professional, according to this florist.
Basically, I think everyone thinks that the DIY floristry thing is quite a radical concept, but it just isn't. I mean, it's now become a thing that people spend so much money on weddings and they outsource everything. This is really just getting back to basics. This is what people used to do. Like, people just used to gather some flowers or get some flowers, chuck them together themselves.
Makeup is another area to save money with the same dazzling results by using slightly less expensive brands. This makeup artist recommends social media tutorials as a good place to start for saving tips.
I think nowadays everyone realizes with the cost of living that we can go for reasonably priced products and still have the exact same finish as we would with a high-end product.
Part of the DIY trend is opting for a smaller, cheaper, but still beautiful cake. This pastry chef recommends brides decorate with cut fresh flowers instead of expensive sugar flowers.
A quote that I would give somebody this year is completely different to what I would have given them maybe 2 years ago, because the price of butter, the price of eggs, everything has gone up so much. So it's just not possible to keep the same prices that you used to have in the past.
There's more than just saving money with a do-it-yourself wedding approach, like the chance for creativity and becoming more vested in their own nuptials.
Man, I'm sure glad I don't have to do that.
Really? I'm glad this has become a trend. I think it was always a thing. A couple of my friends did that and we had a lot of fun, and you can do everything to your exact taste, which is great, right?
Yeah, well, I know, I just mean me personally.
Well, right. Okay, yeah, great. Fair enough.
Leave it to the bride. Well, yeah, and, you know, in modern DIYbride.com says that you can bring a lot of attention to detail and elevate the experience with pressed flower place cards.
Oh, sounds beautiful.
Little tip. If you want.
There you go, some inspiration. All right, while we let that sink in, we are heading to a quick break, but we'll be right back.
NTD News, the fastest growing independent news source in America, bringing you breaking news from around the world. Expert analysis, investigative reporting, and original award-winning documentaries. We're known for our uncensored China coverage you won't find anywhere else. We cover the stories that affect you and shape our world without the political noise. We report from the heart with you in mind. Watch us right here on NTD News.
Good morning. Welcome to NTD.
Good morning. Here are our top stories. Speaker Johnson delays sending articles of impeachment against DOJ Secretary Mayorkas until next week. Why? What stall tactics by Republicans are expected to put pressure for a trial? An analyst breaks it down.
Japan's Prime Minister is in Washington on his first official visit to the White House. An official arrival ceremony is set for today.
A 160-year-old law barring all abortions except to save a woman's life is upheld by the Arizona Supreme Court. More in the law and the reactions of top officials.
Former President Trump loses another bid to delay his so-called hush money trial. What the judge and prosecutors are saying, and what's next for Trump.
And Israeli parents watch in horror as the live location of their son's phone heads toward Gaza on October 7th. Over 6 months into the Israel-Hamas war, they speak about their missing boy who dreamed of becoming an actor.
After failing to become a drug-sniffing canine, one dog finds another way to help people. He's saving lives and winning hearts after the recent Taiwan earthquake.
This is NTD Good Morning. Live from our global headquarters, here are Evelyn Lee and Kevin Hogan.
Welcome to NTD.
Welcome everyone and good morning. Today is Wednesday, April 10th.
Yes, in our news topping this hour, the House will delay sending articles of impeachment against Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas to the Senate until next week. That's according to a spokesman for Speaker Mike Johnson.
This while Republicans in the Senate try to get more time to make their case for a trial. If a trial does take place, though, Democrats are likely to dismiss the charges at the start.
And for analysis on the delay and efforts by Republicans to move forward on ousting DHS Secretary Mayorkas amid Democrat opposition, we hear from Hugh Fike. He's the Director of Government Relations at the Conservative Partnership Institute. Great speaking with you today, Hugh. Speaker Johnson's spokesman says that they are delaying the transmission of the articles so that the Senate has time to perform their constitutional duty. Can you explain the reasoning behind this?
This delay amounts to a win for Senate conservatives. They've been asking for Speaker Johnson to delay transmitting the articles because if they had done it when they had previously decided to do it, it would have landed on a Thursday. And as you might know, the Senate only works a couple days during the week. So at the end of the week, they all start taking off and going back home. So there's a number of concerns. One, that would basically occur on a day when there's barely going to be any senators. But two, that just the seriousness of this trial needs to be taken into full account. So doing it and doing it in the beginning of the week or the middle of the week is really going to be important for making the case and not scheduling it for the end of the week. So good on Speaker Johnson for delaying it, and good on the Senate conservatives for advocating for it.
Well, this certainly is important business. And what would happen if there were less senators there to take this up?
Well, there's a very fine margin of senators in that are going to be present, and so if you have Democrat absences or if you have more conservatives than Democrats, then you could actually have a situation where the trial would have to go forward. So right now, as you know, Leader Schumer is really interested in tabling this and getting it off the plate as quickly as they can. So this enables them to continue to fight and make the case.
Hugh, what are these points of order or the stall tactics that Senator Mike Lee and his Republican allies might use to hold Mayorkas accountable?
Well, this is where it comes into knowing the rules and knowing how to use the rules to your benefit. What Senator Lee and Senator Cruz and a bunch of other senators are doing is that they're taking points of order which require immediate considerations of votes. And so they're doing things like objecting to the scheduling of votes, objecting to the scheduling of committee hearings, basically trying to divert full attention of the Senate onto the impeachment trial of Secretary Mayorkas. So these things will occur, they'll continue to occur so long as there's scheduling or other things trying to be considered by Senator Schumer. So we'll see how many they end up offering. At some point, maybe the parliamentarian says that they'd be dilatory in nature and move on from them. But so long as they keep continuing to get votes, then they're going to be really important for making the case.
Right, and some of those points of order include that if there is a quick dismissal, that would violate Senate rules over how councils interact in this whole process. How will these stall tactics force Democrats in competitive re-election races to cast difficult votes? And what are those difficult votes?
Well, we don't know what they are yet. I think, initially we're just seeing the objection of scheduling votes and other committee hearings. So we'll see what they end up rolling out. But I'd predict that they're going to be pretty tough political votes, given the nature of the border and this interest, and specifically the impeachment trial of Mayorkas. But the border is the number one issue in every poll that outperforms every issue almost by double. This is not a unserious topic. And so I'm sure they'll be linked to that. But as you had mentioned, this is unprecedented. This is the second time in history that a cabinet member has been impeached, and the first time in 150 years. And Majority Leader Schumer is just going to sort of wipe it aside and say this isn't, we don't have time for this in the Senate. So this is really unprecedented. It's something that the liberals in the Senate should consider because once this genie comes out of the bottle, it's very hard to put back. I mean, you've seen what they've done with nominations. They just tried to go around Senator Tuberville and what he was doing with military holds. So they're willing to break the rules so long as it achieves their goals.
Well, thank you so much for the analysis today. Hugh Fike, Director of Government Relations at the Conservative Partnership Institute.
Thank you.
President Biden and First Lady Jill Biden welcomed Japanese Prime Minister Kishida and his wife to the White House last night.
Formalities kick off this morning with an official arrival ceremony on the South Lawn.
The ceremony will include a military review, both countries' national anthems, and remarks from both heads of state.
The leaders will then head to the Oval Office for bilateral meetings. A joint news conference will follow this afternoon.
Officials say today's summit will be a historic upgrade in defense ties with Japan in the face of growing Chinese regime pressure.
Talks are expected to include plans to upgrade U.S. military command structure in Japan. The U.S. ambassador to Japan says it will allow for better coordination and increased deterrence in the Pacific. Japan's prime minister has been invited to address a joint meeting of Congress tomorrow.
President Biden criticized Israel for its handling of the war in Gaza in an interview that aired yesterday.
Biden, calling for a ceasefire and more aid supplies, said he thinks what Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu is doing is a mistake. The president says he doesn't agree with Netanyahu's approach.
Yesterday, Senate leader Chuck Schumer met with Israeli opposition leader Yair Lapid in Washington. That's after Schumer criticized Netanyahu in a floor speech last month and called for new elections in Israel. NTD's Jeremy Sandberg has more updates on the Israel-Hamas war.
President Biden, in an interview with Univision that aired Tuesday, called Israel's prime minister's actions a mistake. The president says he thinks it's outrageous that drone strikes killed 7 aid workers in Gaza last week.
So what I'm calling for is for the Israelis to just call for a ceasefire, allow for the next 6-8 weeks total access to all food and medicine going into the country.
The Hamas-run Gaza Health Ministry says over 33,000 people have been killed in 6 months of war. The ministry does not differentiate between combatants and civilians. Meanwhile, Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu vowed to complete the elimination of the terrorist group Hamas.
Including in Rafah. No force in the world will stop us.
The White House said Tuesday an in-person meeting of Israeli and U.S. officials on a planned operation in Rafah will take place in a couple of weeks.
But again, those open line of communication, there's constant communication happening every day.
National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan said although there's been an increase of aid into Gaza over the last couple days, it's not good enough.
We would like to see more action following through on what the Prime Minister has announced publicly, and we'd like to see that over the course of the next few days.
Senate leader Chuck Schumer met with Israeli opposition leader Yair Lapid in Washington after Lapid met with Secretary of State Antony Blinken on Monday. Lapid said a hostage ceasefire deal would be difficult but doable. Blinken says Israel has not informed the U.S. of any specific date for an offensive push into Rafah. He says the administration is convinced that major military operations in the city would be extremely dangerous for civilians caught in harm's way. Jeremy Sandberg, NTD News.
U.S. Central Command says the U.S. transferred thousands of Iranian weapons it seized to Ukraine.
The transfer comes as further funding for Ukraine remains stalled in the House.
Central Command said the material transferred was enough to arm about 4,000 soldiers. They said the Iranian-made weapons were gathered from stateless vessels over the last 4 years.
Central Command said initial reports suggest some of the weapons were bound for Iran-backed Houthi terrorists in Yemen.
In the absence of a large funding package, the Biden administration also announced an emergency $130 million military sale to Ukraine. It includes equipment to maintain and upgrade its Hawk air defense systems. The Arizona Supreme Court ruled yesterday the state must adhere to a 160-year-old abortion law. It bars all abortions except in cases when it is necessary to save a pregnant woman's life. NTD's Daniel Monahan has more on the ruling and the reactions of lawmakers.
I'm devastated by this decision.
The ruling will make a Civil War-era abortion law enforceable in the state. The law can be traced to as early as 1864, before Arizona became a state, and was codified in 1901. It carries a prison sentence of 2 to 5 years for abortion providers, and it puts Arizona among states with the strictest abortion laws in the country. The state Supreme Court has delayed enforcement of the law for 14 days to give the plaintiffs an opportunity to pursue other challenges in a lower court. Arizona Governor Katie Hobbs called it a dark day in Arizona.
It is really unconscionable that folks in Arizona now are going to have to go to Nevada, California, New Mexico, or Colorado to get the care that they need.
White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre says the law fails to protect women even when their health is at risk.
With today's decision, millions of Arizonians will soon face an even more extreme and dangerous abortion ban than they did before.
President Biden issued a statement saying, "The ruling is a result of the extreme agenda of Republican elected officials who are committed to ripping away women's freedom." In a Monday video statement prior to the Arizona ruling, former President Trump said he is strongly in favor of exceptions for rape, incest, and the life of the mother. The Arizona abortion ban does not include exceptions for rape or incest. Conservative commentator Charlie Kirk wrote on X that getting rid of abortion is an irrefutable, necessary, moral good for society and Arizona. He said, "Praise God we get to be in the fight for the unborn during such a time as this." The 4-2 ruling stems from a case that was revived after the U.S. Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade. The court majority opinion in Arizona said, "Physicians are now on notice that all abortions, except those necessary to save a woman's life, are illegal." The case is the latest high-profile example of the battle over abortion access that has played out across several states since Roe v. Wade was overturned. Since that decision, nearly 24 states have banned or limited access to the procedure. Arizona voters will soon have a say on the matter. There will be a November ballot measure that would ask voters to enshrine abortion access in the state's constitution. Daniel Monahan, NTD News.
Former President Trump loses another bid to have his New York trial delayed. NTD's Jeremy Sandberg has more on that story and updates on other charges Trump is facing.
Former President Trump lost another bid on Tuesday to delay his criminal trial from starting next week. The case involves so-called hush money payments made to adult film actress Stormy Daniels. Trump's lawyers argued Trump should be given time to challenge a gag order in the case. Judge Merchan imposed the order barring the former president from publicly discussing witnesses, prosecutors, court staff, and their families. An appeals court judge swiftly denied the request, but a full panel of appeals judges will later consider Trump's underlying challenge of the gag order. This came a day after Trump's lawyers made a separate motion to delay the trial while seeking to move the case out of Manhattan. That request was denied as well, though the motion to ultimately move the trial will continue. A Trump spokesperson called the trial a witch hunt and said the legal team would continue to fight against it. A lawyer for Trump said the gag order would lead to irreparable First Amendment damages. He argued that Trump should be free to critique the case and the people involved in it, and said the public has the right to hear from him. A lawyer with the Manhattan DA's office said the trial should not be delayed, since Trump could have made the appeal earlier. He also said the gag order was in the public's best interest and necessary for the integrity of the case. He also said his office had to increase security due to Trump's statements, and that potential witnesses were reluctant to testify because of Trump's comments. In Trump's classified documents case, a judge on Tuesday allowed prosecutors to shield the identities of possible witnesses in the case for now. Prosecutors argued revealing the names of witnesses would open them up to threats and harassment. The judge initially agreed to make the information public, but has since re-evaluated her decision. Her new order will allow more records in the case to be made public, but witnesses will be referred to by fictitious names. Trump has pleaded not guilty to charges of illegally keeping highly sensitive records after he left office in 2021 and obstruction. A trial date in the case has not been set. Jeremy Sandberg, NTD News.
Just ahead, Israeli parents watched in horror on October 7th as the live location of their son's phone moved toward Gaza. Over 6 months into the Israel-Hamas war, they speak about their missing boy who dreams of becoming an actor.
A drug-sniffing school dropout, this rescue dog is now winning hearts in Taiwan after the recent earthquake. That's after the break. Welcome back, everyone. Continuing with our coverage of the 6-month mark of the Israel-Hamas war, we have the third part of a special report.
America's Hope host Kelly Wright was recently in Israel talking to the family members of hostages and others to hear how they're coping. NTD's Daniel Monahan has more.
Omer Shem Tov was at the Nova Music Festival when Hamas terrorists surrounded those in attendance, killing hundreds of people and kidnapping many more into the Gaza Strip. Omer called his parents the morning of October 7th, sounding panicked. He told them there was a lot of shooting and that they were under fire. His parents say he managed to send his live location. They saw the point on the map going back and forth. It wasn't clear where, and at some point, it started going towards Gaza. His father showed up to the area around noon, meeting other worried families. He thought maybe they were at the hospital.
So we drove to the hospital and we were waiting, and about 8 p.m. Hamas published a video that we could see Omer and Itai's friend was on the back of a pickup in Gaza.
Omer's mom, Shelly, says the mission to save the hostages is still on full power 6 months on. But it has become more challenging because the body and the soul are tired, and they are very, very worried.
We miss Omer so much, and it's hard to see that people got on with their lives, and we're stuck at October 7.
Shelly Shem Tov says they call Omer their sunshine because everybody wants to be near him.
He's a good boy. He loves to love. He loves music. He has a lot of friends all over. And he's a boy of freedom.
Omer's mother says she's afraid to open her eyes when she wakes up in the morning because she doesn't know what the day will bring.
And when I'm opening my eyes, I see daylight outside. And I'm thinking about my son that didn't see daylight 182 days. Somebody can imagine how it feels? You know, I cannot imagine it.
Omer's brother Amit says hope never dies.
And Amit, what's your message to the world?
Be on the right side. Like, have some mercy. It's about families that were torn apart and were taken away out of the blue. For no good reason, really.
On the issue of people in America supporting Palestinians over Israelis, Amit says he thinks the U.S. lives in a bubble.
They only see the weaker side, so they decide to support the weaker side because this is what's easier to do. They don't understand the whole situation.
Sister Dana says Omer's dream is to be an actor.
So he will get his dream, and everybody will know him. And Omer is just perfect, and I miss him so much, and I want him back here.
NTD's Kelly Wright has been talking to hostage families, rabbis, and pastors, Jewish and Arab people. The America's Hope host has a special report on what he learned coming out in just a few weeks. Daniel Monahan, NTD News.
Just so much that they're going through.
Yeah, looking forward to that special report. And it doesn't get every time. It's so hard to hear those stories. It doesn't get easier, and I think it's good.
Yeah, and the United States is right there with them. Vice President Kamala Harris is meeting with the families of hostages who are still believed to be in Hamas captivity. That's 5 Americans.
Exactly, yeah. And I mean, yesterday, Blinken actually said the ball is now on the hostage negotiations. I mean, the ball is now in Hamas's court. At the same time, you know, Lebanese newspapers were reporting that it seems like Hamas is willing to consider a deal now. The U.S., of course, still asking for, they're asking for 40 alive hostages in the first phase.
And National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan is saying that there's a marathon session going on right now with all those talks between the United States, Qatar, Egypt, and so on.
Well, let's just hope that it comes to fruition soon. And in the meantime, we are moving on to Taiwan because amid the death and destruction from Taiwan's worst earthquake in 25 years, a once failed police dog has excelled in his search for victims.
Roger, the rescue dog, has won the hearts of a nation still in shock from the deadly tremors.
Rescue dogs play a crucial role in helping locate stranded people and bodies. The quake triggered deadly landslides in a scenic national park and caused several buildings to partially collapse. Roger was among the dogs put to work helping to locate the body of one of the 13 people killed in the quake.
Roger was born into a training center for drug sniffing dogs, but his love for fun, food, and people got the better of him, distracting his ability to pay attention and react to trainers' commands. So Roger didn't become a drug-sniffing dog, but his personality and intelligence made him a good candidate for a rescue dog.
Roger is a veteran Quake dog now, but retirement is looming for him. The fire department in the southern city of Kaohsiung sends rescue dogs to good homes once they reach age 9.
Yeah, you got to be really nimble to navigate that rubble.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a well-deserved retirement.
Yes.
All right, and today is actually Hug Your Dog Day. On that topic, in case you need another reason to show some love to your four-legged friends.
Those extra cuddles are beneficial to both of you. Giving your dog hugs releases a feel-good hormone called oxytocin, and for both you and your pup, it could be a boost you need for your day.
Wow. So for you and the dog, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Another reason. All right. Well, we're running out of time here, but we will wrapping up our show right here. But be sure to stay tuned for NTD's News Today broadcast at 11 a.m. Eastern Time coming up. And for round-the-clock original news coverage, visit us at ntd.com or download our NTD app. Thanks for watching. I'm Evelyn Lee.
And I'm Kevin Hogan.